Hello, I'm back again for what will be the final summary of the 16th chapter, part 2. And in this chapter, it's from George and Marina, the Duke and Duchess of Kent, written by Christopher Warwick. You can find this book on Amazon or from thriftbooks.com. It's a wonderful short read. Beach reading. Since the summer is coming up, it's a wonderful read. But I broke this up into two parts because, the last chapters always have a poignant summary and wrap things up so nicely. But this covers the time from, we last left off. Prince Edward was married to Catherine Worsley, and they had baby Prince George. I'm soon named after their father, George, Duke of Kent. And at that time, they had a family. They kept this on the hush hush with Alexandra becoming engaged to the Honorable Angus Ogilvy. And so here we will see what happens. She gets married. And that's where we'll pick up at. Like her parents, Princess Alexandra was married at Westminster Abbey. And if anything, there's an even greater public enthusiasm for this wedding than there had been for her brother's 2 years earlier. The reason was that the good-looking 26-year-old princess was tall, elegant, and very much her mother's daughter. She was highly ranked on a very short list of the most popular and approachable royal figures, bringing as she did a natural warmth and spontaneity to her official role. I'm going to stop right here. I think the last years of Queen Elizabeth's life, we would often see pictures of Alexandra and Elizabeth together, riding the carriage, trooping of the color. They had a very good bond with the Kents, so as they all do with royal cousins. As popular and well-loved with the British royal family as the general public at home as well as abroad, Alexandra was also highly regarded within royal families of Europe and Scandinavia, to most of whom she was related. Indeed, if Eddie and Catherine's wedding had been well attended by foreign royal guests, the Almanac de Gotha would be even more in evidence of Alexandra's. Among those attending the celebrations were the bride's aunt and uncle, Olga and Paul of Yugoslavia, her cousin, Countess Elena Zutoring-Jettenbach, Wooly and Toto's daughter, and her husband, Archduke Ferdinand of Austria, King Olaf, and Crown Prince Harold of Norway, Queen Ingrid of Denmark, and her youngest daughter, Anne-Marie, who, the following year, would marry Constantine of the Hellenes, and there with his mother, Queen Frederica, his sisters, Sophia and Irene, and Sophia's still relatively new husband, Juan Carlos of Spain. Queen Louise of Sweden was with her step-granddaughters, the Princess Margaretha and Desiree. The former queen, Helen of Romania, and Ina of Spain, Princess Irene of the Netherlands, and her sister Marguerite, the Duchess of Aosta. Prince and Princess Frederick, Swedish greats, Prince and Princess George of Hanover, and several princes and princesses of Hesse, Baden, and Hohenlohe-Langenburg. At a floodlit Windsor castle 2 days before the Abbey wedding of Wednesday, the 24th of April, 1963, royal guests, together with over thousands of others, attended a white tie and tiara ball which the Queen gave in in honor of her cousin, and which, in the Waterloo Chambers, turned into a ballroom for the night. Alexandra and Angus opened up with a Strauss waltz. 5 or 6 hours later, and after more traditional dancing had given way to the rock and roll inspired twist, in which the Queen and Prince Philip also joined in. The party began to break up, with Alexandra and Angus leaving the castle for the drive back to London not long before the dawn. Now that is quite a sight to see, just trying to imagine. Well, she was a young queen. Queen Elizabeth and Prince Philip doing the twist. Later the same day, while the princess and her fiancé gave a small reception at Kensington Palace for some of their overseas visitors, a final rehearsal for the bridesmaids and pages took place at Westminster Abbey, while the Queen, with King Olaf sitting beside her and Prince Philip in the courier seat next to the driver, took the foreign royal wedding guests on a motor coach tour of Windsor Great Park and the surrounding Berkshire countryside, before ending up at the 15th century Hind's Head in Bray for upmarket pub lunch. That evening, while Angus Ogilvy hosted a dinner party for his family, Princess Alexandra stayed at home with her mother, sister-in-law, and some close friends, enjoying a private hen night celebration. The next morning, Alexandra woke up early, and although unable to eat any breakfast, she appeared to be the least nervous member of her family, telling them, "Now let's keep calm, everything's going to be fine." With the midday ceremony no more than a few hours away, one timely arrival at Kensington Palace was John Kavanagh, who was again responsible for designing the royal wedding dress. From the start, Prince Alexandra knew exactly what she wanted: a classically simple lace dress with no bows, no frills, no flounces, or unnecessary trimmings. To help him, she entrusted Kavanagh with the lace veil that her second cousin, Lady Patricia Ramsay, the former Princess Patricia of Connaught, had worn at her own wedding at Westminster Abbey in 1919, in which she had given to Alexandra. Believed to have once owned by Queen Charlotte, the old rectangular lace veil was much too old-fashioned to be worn by a modern royal bride, though, because Alexandra liked its pattern of oak leaves and acorns, symbolic of strength and endurance, and in Greek mythology, very appropriately, the tree that its sacred Zeus, who was the king of gods. She asked the designer if the motif could be replicated in the lace for her own gown. John Kavanagh entrusted the task to the same firm of French weavers that had made the silk gauze for the Duchess of Kent's wedding dress. He also came to an agreement with the British Customs and Excise that when it arrived in England, the 80 yards of magnolia-tinted lace would not have to be declared as such. To have done so would have been to tip off the press, some of whom had already attempted to bribe members of Kavanagh's staff for inside information. In its simplicity, the wedding dress was everything Alexandra had hoped for, with a high round neck, wrist-length sleeves, fitted bodice, and straight skirt forming a long train. The dress would be mounted on white tulle, hand-sewn with thousands of gold palettes to add to the slightest shimmer as she walked, while from her shoulders would fall a court train, 21 feet in length. That would be edged with a border of antique Valenciennes lace that had belonged to Marina's brother, Princess Nicholas of Greece. Oh, Princess Marina's mother, Princess Nicholas of Greece. During one of the final fittings, as Alexandra stood in the front of a full-length mirror, John Kavanagh, who was standing behind her about to attach the court train to her shoulders, suddenly had what he called a flash of inspiration and suggested that the princess wear the train as a veil. It would, he said, be a first. Never, never before had a royal bride worn a dress and a veil of the same matching material. It was an idea that both Alexandra and her mother immediately liked, with the result that earlier thoughts of a tall veil were now forgotten. By 11 o'clock on the morning of the 24th of April, as the bells of Westminster Abbey pealed out, most of 2,000 guests had already arrived. Within another half hour, the plethora of European royalty had taken their places, and shortly afterwards, the royal family and the Ogilvies had also been seated on opposite sides of the sacrum. Nearby, Angus Ogilvy, with his best man, fellow Scot and Second World War hero, the Honorable Peregrine Fairfax, awaited Princess Alexandra's arrival. Also waiting for her at the west door were her 5 bridesmaids in their Kavanaugh-designed dresses of pale cream zibberline, who were again led by Princess Anne, along with Ogilvy's niece, Dune, and Helen, and Ferdinand of Austria's effervescent 6-year-old daughter, the blonde, blue-eyed Archduchess Elizabeth. With them were 2 page boys, and if the bridegroom himself had decided to wear a morning dress, tailcoat with striped trousers instead of a kilt, his nephew David, the master of Ogilvy, Simon Hay, the son of Sir Philip, both wore the Ogilvy tartan. Arriving at Westminster Abbey to a fanfare sounded by trumpeters of the Royal Military School of Music, Alexandra, in her lace gown, wearing the diamond fringed tiara her mother had worn at her own wedding, took Eddie's arm for the long and, because of the weight of her train, sedate walk along the blue carpeted nave of the altar steps. For Princess Marina, wearing an elegantly exotic tunic dress of shimmering gold tissue, embroidered with topaz, and a cavalier-style hat covered with gold sequins, watching her only daughter become the Honorable Mrs. Angus Ogilvy was a proud, if deeply poignant moment. It was also one of overwhelming memories, for it was in that very same place that she and Princess George had knelt almost 30 years earlier and had been married according to the very same form of service that Alexandra and Angus now observed. The royal wedding wasn't, of course, the only headlining event in 1963. It was the year of the great train robbery in Aylesbury, Buckinghamshire, of Martin Luther King's famous I Have a Dream speech on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial in Washington, D.C., of the election of the papal throne in Rome of Pope Paul VI, of John F. Kennedy's Ich bin ein Berliner speech in West Berlin, and the scandalous divorce proceedings of Ian Campbell, the 11th Duke of Argyll, and his Duchess, the one-time society beauty Margaret Wigham, whom Lord Wheatley, the presiding judge at Edinburgh's Court of Sessions, condemned as a completely promiscuous woman whose sexual appetites could only be satisfied with a number of men. Still more shocking and sensational than the Argyll divorce, however, was the headline hogging the Profumo affair that was famously brought to trial at the Old Bailey. At the center of the scandal were Vicar's son, Dr. Stephen Ward, a well-known society osteopath. John Profumo, the heroin Oxford-educated Minister of State for War and Privy Councillor in the Conservative government of Harold Macmillan, and 2 Soho cabaret girls, Christopher Keeler and Mandy Rice Davies, who were the chief witnesses for the prosecution. In their book, An Affair of State, Philip Knightley and Caroline Kennedy reminded us that Stephen Ward, Stephen Ward, whom Lord Denning at the time, Master of the Rolls and the second most senior judge in England and Wales, described as the most evil man he'd ever met, was a central figure in the political scandal which shook Britain. It was in Ward's flat that John Profumo used to meet Christine Keeler. It was Ward who introduced Christine to the dashing Soviet diplomat Yevgeny Ivanov. It was Ward who told MI-15 about Profumo because he thought that their affair might pose a security risk. When Profumo lied to the House of Commons about his love life and the resulting scandal threatened to bring down the government, it was Ward who stood in the dock, a scapegoat for the establishment. As Ward was hung out to dry, and for a week society talked of nothing else, so his friends, including the rich and famous, through whose lives he breathed, abandoned him. As well as practicing osteopathy, Ward had studied art on a part-time basis at the Slade School, and it was as a portraitist that he undertook regular commissions for Illustrated London News. Working in charcoal and pastel, he provided the popular weekly news magazine with a number of drawings of members of the royal family. Drawings like the Duke of Edinburgh, Princess Margaret, Eddie and Catherine, Mary, the Princess Royale, the Gloucesters, Princess Marina was among his sitters. Hers, Ward said afterwards, was the most difficult likeness to capture because the mouth is ever so slightly askew, the sort of thing in a drawing that is extremely hard not to overdo. The result didn't please me, and I didn't think it pleased her. What pleased Marina even less was seeing her old friend John Profumo mired and humiliated by scandal, even if he had nobody but himself to blame for his downfall. In June, he resigned both as Minister of War and Member of Parliament, though there were those who disowned him and his wife, the former film actress Valerie Hobson. Princess Marina was not of their number. All the same, there was one occasion during the summer of 1963 on which she canceled an engagement with them. On 3 August, as the trial at the Old Bailey was about to be concluded and sentences passed, the Profumos were to have dined with Marina at Kensington Palace. But that day, Stephen Ward, who had swallowed enough Nebutol tablets to kill a horse, died at St. Stephen's Hospital in Fulham. As soon as she heard, the princess canceled her dinner party, perhaps feeling the need to breathe fresher air, left London for a few days and went to Scotland. Come autumn, Marina had another more positive thing to think about, much closer to home. For by then it had been confirmed that Alexandra and Catherine were both pregnant with their first and second child, respectively. To add to the celebratory mood, it had been announced that the Queen and Princess Margaret were anticipating the proverbial patter of tiny feet, with the birth of each member of the royal quartet expecting the following spring. Alexandra had fallen pregnant just weeks after she and Angus married, and led the way, which she gave birth to son James on leap year, the 29th of February, 1964, followed by the Queen, whose fourth and youngest child, Edward, was born on 10 March. And then Catherine gave birth to a daughter she and Eddie named Helen on the 28th of April. And then 3 days later, on the 1st of May, Princess Margaret was delivered of her second child, also a daughter, Sarah. Well, each of these events naturally gave rise to celebration, and for Marina there was the additional pleasure Even the novelty of having become a grandmother for the second and third time in the space of only 8 weeks, there were other occasions within her extended family to look forward to. In September 1964, for example, there was the wedding of at the Metropolitan Cathedral of Athens of Tino of the Hellenists, who, on the death of his father, King Paul VI, 6 months earlier, had succeeded as King Constantine II, and the 8-year-old Prince Anne Marie of Denmark, to whom he had become engaged to 2 years earlier. As events of this kind invariably did, and frequently still do, the wedding of King Constantine, who at the age of only 24 was Europe's youngest reigning monarch, brought together a host of royalty from around the world. With her cousin Philip, the Duke of Edinburgh, Prince Charles, and Princess Anne, who was to be one of the bridesmaids, Marina flew out to Athens, where she was joined by her sister Olga for the wedding festivities. 18 months later, Amsterdam was the setting of another royal wedding when, on 10 March 1966, Crown Beatrice of the Netherlands, the eldest of Marina's old friends, Queen Juliana's 4 daughters, married German-born diplomat Klaus von Amsberg. The wedding, which Princess Alexandra was a witness to at the couple's obligatory civil ceremony, was attended with Marina. It was made the more newsworthy because of street protests and disturbances, including smoke bombs thrown at the bride's gilded coach on the part of an organization known as Provo. It was a short-lived counterculture movement. Its members were vehemently opposed to Beatrix marrying a former Weimar conscript, little more than 20 years after the country was invaded and occupied by German troops for the duration of the Second World War. At Trix and Klaus's wedding, Princess Alexandra was already 5 months pregnant, and her second child, and it was at Thatched House Lodge, the Georgian house of Richmond Park, that Angus Ogilvy had leased from the crown shortly before he and Alexandra were married, that a daughter was born on the 31st of July. At her christening, at the Chapel Royal, St. James Palace, a few weeks later, on November the 9th, the baby was named Marina in honor of her grandmother. If the family had always played a vital part in Princess Marina's life, her official activities, her work, always provided an important focus. In September and October, not long before the christening of her second granddaughter, Princess Marina had again been asked to represent the Queen at celebrations marking the independence of countries that had formerly come under British rule. Flying out to South Africa, she was present at ceremonies marking the transformation of the former British Protectorate of Buchanland into the Republic of Botswana, at Batsuland into the Kingdom of Lesotho. At home, she continued her support for each of the organizations with which she was connected. Ranging from the newest, she had become the first chancellor of the newly established University of Kent in 1966, to the oldest, among which were the Royal National Lifeboat Institutions. The WRNS, whose Golden Jubilee reunion she attended at the Royal Festival Hall in July 1967, and of course, the Wimbledon Tennis Championships, at which shortly after her return from Copenhagen, where she had attended the wedding of Crown Princess Marguerite of Denmark to French diplomat Henri de Laborde de la Montpezat. She presented the trophies on center court to John Newcombe, and Billie Jean King, that year's winners of men's and women's single finals, respectively. It was also during the summer of 1967 that Princess Marina joined other members of the royal family for what, although an official public engagement was very much a family occasion, the unveiling by the Queen of a memorial plaque to Queen Mary on the garden wall of Marble House. Of gray slate, it had been commissioned to commemorate the centenary of her birth, incorporating a medallion profile portrait of Queen Mary in bas relief. The plaque was the work of Sir William Reed Dick, who had sculpted the full-length statue of King George V that stands outside Westminster Abbey facing the House of Parliament. Significantly, an invitation to attend the ceremony on the 7th of June, which was watched by crowds of onlookers, had also been extended by the Queen, not only to her uncle, the Duke of Windsor, as the elder Queen Mary's two surviving sons, but also to his wife Wallis. It was a historic moment, not least because the Duchess of Windsor, whom Queen Mary referred to at the time of the abdication as an adventuress, had never before been invited to a royal event, public or private, much less one in the presence of the Queen, and more especially the Queen Mother, who has always regarded was regarded as Wallis's most bitter opponent. From Claridge's, where they were staying, the Duke and Duchess of Windsor drove in one of the official claret and black Rolls-Royce limousines that had been sent from the Royal Mews, to the blue carpeted dais on the corner of Marble Road and the Mall. As she took her place next to the Duke, the stylish Duchess in her slim-fitting navy blue coat and white mint scarf, a small navy straw pillbox that perched on her immaculate coiffed hair, eclipsed every one of her royal in-laws, including the elegant Princess Marina herself. After the ceremony on what was Derby Day, a sacrosanct event in the royal racing calendar, and one that was rarely, if ever, missed, the Queen and Prince Philip, the Queen Mother, and the Duke and Duchess of Gloucester. The Duke, otherwise Prince Henry, was the younger of the Queen Mary's surviving sons. She had left immediately for Epsom. The Windsors did not go with them. Instead, David and Wallis, who had celebrated their 30th wedding anniversary 4 days earlier, joined Marina, Eddie, Catherine, and Michael for a lunch at Kensington Palace. Whatever the rights and wrongs of the abdication and the grievances of some members of the royal family harbored in its aftermath, Princess Marina never forgot how close Prince George had been to his eldest brother, and was determined that neither she nor her children would lose touch with the Windsors, and they never did. 14 months later, the Duke would return to England for an occasion nobody could have anticipated. In the year 1968, it had started quietly enough, with Marina and Michael eagerly looking forward to the private 3-week safari they took together in Kenya, Uganda, and Tanzania. Later, during the summer, Maria also planned to visit Olga and Paul at their villa near Florence, as she usually did. But then, on the 19th of July, for the first time in more than 30 years, the princess had to pull out of an official engagement. That afternoon, she'd been due to visit the Frimley and the Camberley Cadet Corps, but because of what was officially described as a slight knee surgery, she asked Alexandra to go in her place. The truth was that for a while now, Maria had trouble by her left leg, which would suddenly give way without warning, causing her to stumble and fall. It wasn't long before the weakness also affected her left arm. Although she was only 61, she made light of it, joking that it was all due to advanced old age. We all grow old, and we must face it, she said in a recent speech. For whatever our misfortunes have been, the, dis- the disabilities and infirmities of old age are universal. Universal or not, old age was not something Marina herself was looking forward to, though in the end it didn't matter. At Kensington Palace, on the 18th of July, the day before she was due to visit Camberley, Princess Marina fell badly and was admitted for tests to the National Hospital for Nervous Diseases. A day or two later, under firm instructions to rest, she returned home. What she would never know, and Eddie, Alexandra, and Michael were to keep the agonizingly painful secret strictly between them, was that the tests had revealed an inoperable brain tumor. The prognosis was that at the very most, the princess had no more than 6 or 7 months to live. On the day she returned from the hospital, Noel Coward visited her for tea. She was in bed, and she looked very papery, he confided in his diary. I'm very worried about her. She was very cheerful, however, and we gossiped and we giggled. A few weeks later, on Friday, the 23rd of August, Marina drove out of the Richmond Park where she, Alexandra, and the grandchildren spent 2.5 hours sitting together in the garden at the Thatched House Lodge. The following Sunday, which happened to be the 26th anniversary of Prince George's death, Alexandra and Angus joined Marina and her old friend Zoya Pokluska for an informal lunch at Kensington Palace. That evening, the princess suffered a blackout. By 9 o'clock the following morning, she drifted into an untroubled sleep. A little later, the Archbishop of Canterbury, Dr. Ramsay, drove over from Lambeth Palace and spent a quarter of an hour praying with the princess's family in her bedroom. At 11:40 a.m. the next day, Tuesday, the 27th of August, without having regained consciousness, Princess Marina, the Duchess of Kent, died. Her daughters, her sons and her daughters, as well as her son and daughter-in-law, were at her bedside, as well as her sister Olga, who had arrived from Italy the day before, having received Alexandra's urgent phone call. Officially announced at 12:05 p.m. after the Queen, who was on holiday at Balmoral, and the rest of the royal family had been informed, news of Princess Marina's death was flashed around the world. Television and radio programs were interrupted, flags were lowered to half-mast, and the front pages of the evening paper, like those of the following day, carried banner headlines. To her family, who knew only too well that would happen at some point during the next 6 months, but who could not have imagined it would be over a mere 5 weeks. The suddenness of Marina's death came as a devastating shock. For them, the only consolation was that in other circumstances, the princess had been spared a prolonged and debilitating illness. Indeed, in response to this message of sympathy, Princess Alexandra wrote to Cecil Beaton, "Thank God my sweet mamma knew no pain or suffering, and now she's at peace." At Windsor Castle, about 6 p.m. on the 29th of August, the same date on which his funeral had taken place in 1942, Prince George's coffin was brought up from the royal vault beneath the Albert Memorial Chapel, which was adjacent to St. George's Chapel. Then, as residents drew their curtains, as they had been previously instructed to do. It was placed in a hearse and driven up through the castle's precincts and along with the winding tree-lined red brick road, as it had known, to Frogmore, the 33-acre estate acquired by George III, that it's part of the private home park. To the immediate northwest of the lake, behind the mausoleum which Queen Victoria had built for Prince Albert and where she too is interred, lies the royal burial ground. Since it was consecrated in 1928, members of the royal family have been buried there in an immaculate garden setting, and it was there that 2 new graves had been dug side by side. Prince George's remains were lowered into one of them. The following morning, on the 30th of August, royal relations began arriving at Heathrow ahead of the funeral that afternoon. Among them was the Duke of Windsor, whom Eddie met on his arrival from Paris, Queen Juliana of the Netherlands, King Constantine and Queen Anne-Marie of Hellenis, who now lived in Rome, whence they had fled in April in 1967 after a group of white right-wing army officers staged a coup d'etat. Tino's mother, the Dowager Queen Frederica, Queen Helena of Romania, the ex-King Umberto of Italy, and the Duke of Edinburgh's sister, Princess Margarita of Hohenlohe-Langenburg. At Windsor Castle, meanwhile, the non-commissioned officers of the Queen's Regiment, the Devonshire and Dorset Regiment, the Corps of Royal Electrical and Mechanical Engineers, who would act as pallbearers for the Royal Colonel-in-Chief, rehearsed carrying a dummy coffin up and down the triple flight of stones at the west door of St. George's Chapel. Inside, beneath the magnificent fan vault roof, Princess Marina's oak coffin covered with the royal standard and the white and blue Greek flag, on which were both wreaths of red, pink, and yellow roses from the grown-up children she'd known as Eddie, Pudding, and Mao, and of blue and white flowers from Olga and Paul, lay a candlefique flanked by flickering candles. A few hours later at the funeral began with the choristers singing the sentences, "I am the resurrection and the life." The royal family walked behind the coffin in the choir, aglow with the heraldic devices and the colorful banners of the Knights of the Garter, during the service which was conducted by the Archbishop of Canterbury and the Dean of Windsor. The Reverend Robin Woods, afterwards the Bishop of Worcester, the impressive presence of the black-robed Archimandrite Gregory Theodorus, the Chancellor of the Diocese of Thyatira, as well as the inclusion of the collect hymn of the Holy Orthodox Church, "Give rest, O Christ, to thy servant with thy saints," was a reminder that Princess Marina frequently worshipped at the Anglican Parish Church of St. Mary's Abbots near her home at Kensington Palace. She had always remained a member of the Greek Orthodox Church. Presently, as the service came to close and the notes of Sir Henry Walford Davies' anthem, "God Be in My Hand," faded away, the Duke of Kent, the Princess Alexandra, and Princess Michael held hands as they followed their mother's coffin towards the west door. Just before they stepped outside, however, they let go. It had been a private moment between the 3 grieving siblings, but was also a reminder that royal figures do not betray private emotions in public. As the family looked on the military pallbearers successfully negotiating the west steps, with a well-rehearsed precision placed the lead-lined coffin they had borne on their shoulders inside the waiting hearse, Minutes later, following the solitary route Prince George's remains had taken earlier the previous evening, the cortege left the chapel's horse cloisters on its way to Frogmore, where Princess Marina was laid to rest next to her husband. Like her marriage to Prince George, a fleeting once upon a time, a moment in the 20th century British royal history, Princess Marina's life was to be a relatively short one. But as the then Dean of Westminster, Dr. Eric Abbott, said in his address to the congregation of 2,000 people at the princess's televised memorial service in Westminster Abbey on the 25th of October, 1968, she had not only made England her home, but for over 30 years had given it an unswerving service. With her death, it is no exaggeration to say that the country Princess Marina had adopted as her own had lost one of its most highly respected public figures. Moreover, the nobility she brought to the royal family in terms of her royal and imperial heritage has never been and is unlikely ever to be equaled. And that is the end of George and Marina, the Duke and Duchess of Kent.